the assumption that no one questioned. For decades, one assumption shaped global power: that when the United States moves, everyone else adjusts. That when Washington imposes pressure, economic, political, or strategic, its neighbors absorb the shock. And that when a U.S. president decides to weaponize trade, tariffs, or diplomacy, smaller economies have only two choices: comply or suffer. But something unexpected happened during the Trump era. Quietly, gradually, almost invisibly, Canada, long seen as America's closest partner, junior ally, and economic extension, didn't just react. It adapted. And in the process, it uncovered something far more powerful than retaliation or resistance. It uncovered a trillion-dollar strategy. Not announced in a speech. Not branded with slogans. Not framed as defiance. But built piece by piece, through infrastructure, capital flows, trade architecture, and strategic patience. Here's the mystery. How did a country so economically dependent on the United States find a way to neutralize America's most aggressive economic president, without confrontation? And even more unsettling, is this strategy still unfolding, and could it permanently change North America's balance of power? Tonight we follow the trail, backwards, forwards, and sideways, through trade wars, pipelines, tariffs, minerals, and quiet financial leverage. This isn't a story about politics. It's a story about economic gravity. Canada in America's shadow. To understand why Canada's response mattered, you need to understand how asymmetrical the relationship was. For generations, Canada's economy revolved around one axis: the United States. Over 70% of Canadian exports flowed south. Millions of Canadian jobs depended on U.S. market access. Energy, autos, agriculture, lumber, nearly everything crossed the border. Canada didn't just trade with the U.S. Canada was integrated into the U.S. system. This integration brought prosperity, but also vulnerability. Because when you're deeply connected to one market, leverage flows in one direction. And for decades, Canada accepted that. Enter Donald Trump. When Donald Trump ran for president, Canada wasn't the target. China was. Mexico was. NATO was. But once Trump entered office, something became clear. No ally was immune. Trump didn't see trade relationships as partnerships. He saw them as scorecards. Deficits were losses. Surpluses were wins. And allies who ran surpluses against the U.S. were, in his words, taking advantage. Canada suddenly found itself reframed, not as a friend, but as a competitor. And that reframing triggered a chain reaction. When the shock hit, the first real shock came with steel and aluminum tariffs. Canada, America's largest supplier of both, was hit under the justification of national security. This wasn't symbolic. It struck at manufacturing, construction, energy infrastructure, employment. For Canada, this was unprecedented. How does your closest ally justify tariffs by calling you a security threat? The answer didn't matter. The message did. Canada could no longer assume stability. The NAFTA threat. Then came something even bigger. Trump threatened to tear up NAFTA. For Canada, NAFTA wasn't just a trade deal. It was the backbone of auto supply chains, cross-border manufacturing, investment certainty. Ending NAFTA would have caused immediate economic shock. And Trump meant it. Negotiations were aggressive. Public insults were frequent. Pressure was constant. Canada had two options: fight loudly, adapt quietly. Canada chose the second. From defense to strategy. This is where the story shifts. Instead of focusing only on saving NAFTA, Canadian policymakers began asking a deeper question. What if dependence itself is the problem? That question changed everything. Diversification becomes doctrine. Canada accelerated trade diversification at scale. Not symbolically, but structurally. CETA with the European Union opened access to a market of 450 million consumers. CPTPP connected Canada to fast-growing Asian economies. Energy export routes were redesigned to reach global markets, not just the U.S. This wasn't fast. It was deliberate. And it was expensive. The capital shift. At the same time, global capital was changing behavior. Trump's unpredictability created risk. And markets hate uncertainty. Canada began to position itself as stable, predictable, rules-based. Foreign investment flowed into infrastructure, real estate, clean energy, mining, technology. This wasn't accidental. Canada was becoming a safe haven economy in a volatile world. The quiet buildup. No press conferences. No grand announcements. But the numbers told a different story. Canada's economic footprint, measured in asset ownership, pension capital, strategic resources, was expanding far beyond what headlines suggested. This is where the trillion-dollar strategy started to emerge. When the trade war went global. As Trump escalated trade wars with China, Europe, and others, something unexpected happened. Canada benefited. Supply chains began rerouting. Companies looked for political stability, access to U.S. markets, reliable legal systems. Canada checked all three boxes. Manufacturing investment returned. Energy demand surged. Critical mineral exploration exploded. Ironically, Trump's pressure accelerated Canada's leverage. The resource reality. Here's a fact that rarely makes headlines. Canada controls vast reserves of lithium, nickel, cobalt, rare earth elements, uranium. These resources are essential for electric vehicles, defense systems, batteries, renewable energy, advanced manufacturing. As the U.S. realized its dependency on China for these materials, Canada's strategic value skyrocketed. But Canada didn't weaponize this value. It monetized it patiently. The post-Trump realization. When Trump left office, many assumed the tension would disappear. But Canada didn't reverse course. Because by then something had changed. The strategy was working. Trade exposure to the U.S. declined gradually. Global investment diversified. Domestic capital pools, especially pension funds, reached trillions in assets. Canada wasn't just reacting anymore. It was shaping outcomes. The pension power factor. This is the hidden pillar of the trillion-dollar strategy. Canadian pension funds are among the largest in the world. They own infrastructure, airports, utilities, energy assets, data centers, across continents. This gives Canada financial influence, long-term leverage, strategic optionality. Few countries have this structure. Even fewer use it intentionally. Why traditional pressure no longer works. Tariffs failed. Threats backfired. Public confrontation strengthened Canada's case internationally. The old tools, economic bullying, trade brinkmanship, lost effectiveness. Because Canada had reduced single-point dependency. The fix that once worked, didn't anymore. A pattern repeating globally. This isn't just about Canada and Trump. It's part of a broader shift. Countries are learning that dependency is vulnerability. Diversification is power. Patience beats confrontation. We see it in Europe reducing Russian energy reliance. Asia reshaping supply chains. Middle powers building strategic autonomy. Canada just did it early. And quietly. Power without provocation. Canada didn't defeat Trump. It outgrew the problem. This is modern economic power. Invisible. Structural. Long-term. not built through dominance but through design. 3 takeaways. 1. Dependence is the real risk. It doesn't feel dangerous until it is. 2. Power shifts quietly. By the time it's visible, it's already established. 3. The biggest strategies are rarely announced. They're executed patiently over years. Trump didn't invent economic pressure. He exposed how fragile many systems were. Canada's response shows what comes next. So the real question isn't, how did Canada counter Trump? It's, which countries are building their exit strategies right now, before the next shock arrives? If this changed how you think about power, trade, or global strategy, like the video, subscribe for deep dive geopolitical documentaries. Share this with someone who still thinks power only comes from confrontation. Because in the modern world, the quiet strategies reshape everything.